Welcome back everybody to the final game review of the 2021 FIDE World Cup. The World Cup is a knockout event, very fun event held in Sochi, Russia, and the finalists of the World Cup are going to be awarded tickets to the 2022 Candidates Tournament. The Candidates Tournament, we know, is the tournament that will decide who the challenger for the World Championship crown is going to be for that year. That is 2022. We already have a match in 2021 that's going to be happening later in November. That is the one between Jan Nepomniachtchi and the world champion Magnus Carlsen. But in 2022, we don't know who the world champion is going to be, and we don't know who the challengers are going to be. But we do know that two of those challengers are going to be Jan Duda and Sergei Karjakin, who are disputing the finals of the World Cup. In the first game, we saw Jan Duda with the black pieces hold on to Sergei Karjakin in quite an easy draw. Let's see what happened in their second game of their mini match. This is Jan Duda versus Sergei Karjakin for all the marbles. Let's get right into the game. We have d4 from Jan Duda, knight to f6, c4, e6, knight to f3, and now we have the move d5, knight to c3, and now we have, I would say, the first surprise of the game, and that is the move c5. In general, in this position, Sergei Karjakin has opted previously for the Ragozin. Ragozin became pretty much the most popular line in against d4 with the move bishop to b4 like this. We've seen this played so many times in the Grand Chess Tour, in the World Cup. At the top level especially, players opt for this move bishop to b4, which is a very solid approach. But instead of that, Sergei Karjakin decides to go with the move c5. C takes d5, c takes d4, queen takes d4, e takes d5, and now we see the drawbacks of this move c5. Well, you're going to be facing this position where you have an isolated queen's pawn as black, and we know that this is a strategical, well, weakness in the position, and generally top level players definitely know how to massage that weakness, how to take advantage of it and put a lot of pressure. Maybe they're not going to win, maybe they're not going to get a decisive advantage, but they're going to put a lot of unpleasant pressure on that isolated queen's pawn. Bishop to g5, attacking this pawn indirectly because you want to eliminate the defender and then just pick up the pawn. Bishop to e7, defending this knight on f6. Now if you take on f6, I'm simply going to take back with the bishop, and unfortunately you cannot pick up my pawn because intermezzo with bishop takes c3, that's a check. You're going to be forced to take back, recapture with the b pawn, and then unfortunately your queen is going to be defenseless. I'm going to pick up that queen, and that's going to be an extra queen and a winning game for black. So of course white is now going to take on f6, decided to go with the move e3, solidifying this square in front of the isolated queen's pawn. This is going to be a very important square for my pieces. I'm going to be able to get a knight there. Maybe I'm going to be able to put some more pressure on the d file, and then as long as I don't allow you as black to push d4 and create a lot of dynamic play in the position, well, I'm going to have the advantage as white. We have a castle, rook to d1, putting some pressure on the d file, knight to c6, queen to a4, bishop to e6, bishop to b5, queen to b6, bishop takes f6, and that is eliminating one of the defenders of this d5 square. Knight takes d5, bishop takes d5, rook takes d5, bishop to b2, and this is a transitional sequence. Of course, we see white has captured that isolated queen's pawn, black in return has captured this pawn on b2. Nevertheless, we have this inclusion of the opposite color bishops, and we know that whenever we have opposite color bishops, well, the side that has more targets to attack, the side that has more dynamic play in the position, and the side that has a safer king, well, that side is probably going to be preferred. So this case is the white side. King to e2, a very interesting move and decision by Jan Duda, and I do believe that this was probably his preparation, because king to e2 is not an easy move to make. Nevertheless, now we understand some of the ideas behind positions with behind positions with opposite color bishops, and that is this king on e2, despite the fact that we still have queens on the board. We have queens on the board, we have two pairs of rooks on the board. This move king to e2 shouldn't be possible, shouldn't be legal, right? Because this king could fall under a tremendous attack. Well, that's not the case, because you don't have any pieces to attack that king on the light squares. The only overlord of the light squares domain is my bishop on b5. You don't have an opponent for that bishop on the light squares. You do control a lot of dark squares. Nevertheless, you're unable to attack my king on the dark squares. So this king to e2 is actually quite a safe move. And also it prepares for the endgame, because once we enter the endgame, we know that we want to have the king closer to the center. So that's why Duda decides to go this move, king to e2. Bishop to f6, rook to d1, taking full control of the d file, rook to c8, bishop to c4, queen to b4, queen to b3, queen to b3, bishop takes b3, and now we have the move knight to b8, and that is defending against any sort of invasion on d7. That is a move that I did not expect. The problem is, if you try to go rook to d8, well, it's a big problem, because I'm still going to continue to go rook to d7. I'm not going to exchange both pairs of rooks. I'm going to go rook to d7, put some more pressure on f7. You can take there, I will take back, and then unfortunately, well, you're going to have to lose a pawn or play the move knight to d8, which is very undesirable, because this knight on d8 looks very, very bad, very passive. Nevertheless, this would have been a way to try to defend as black. So let's see what happened in the game. He decided not to go rook to d8, he decided to go knight to b8 and use this method to defend against this invasion on d7. And now we have a typical expansion on the king side. You're not actually trying to attack the king with this expansion on the king side, g4, h4, but what you're trying to do is eliminate some of the spots where your opponent can place their pieces. Well, this bishop on f6 is going to be suffering right now, because g5 is coming and the bishop on f6 is not going to have a stable outpost, and that is a very difficult thing to deal with as black, especially when you're on the defending side. We see h6, h4, g6. This is creating a spot for the bishop to go to g7, g5, h takes g5, h takes g5, bishop to e7. Well, he decided not to go bishop to e7. The problem with the bishop to e7 is that right now I'm going to be able to go knight to h4, and it's actually very difficult to defend against this type of sacrifices. Either that or just move the rook away, open up this diagonal, create this pin for against the pawn on f7, and then it's going to be very difficult for black to defend against knight takes g6, taking advantage of the pin. If you try to defend with the king going on the h file, well, surprise, surprise, I have some more manpower on that h file. I'm going to bring the rook to h1 and your position is going to be in shambles. So he decided to go bishop to e7. That allows against any sort of knight to h4 the king to come to g7 and defend against this knight takes g6 very unpleasant threat. So let's see what white did. He played the move rook to e5, harassing this bishop on e7 even more. Once again, once your pieces, your opponent's pieces, don't have any stable outposts, well, it's time to attack those pieces and harass them as much as possible. We have knight to c6, rook to d7, and this is a tremendous concept. I'm going to be sacrificing an exchange. Knight takes e5 is a possibility. Well, the problem is that after knight takes e5, I'm going to be able to take back with the knight, and that's going to allow me to have all my pieces focused on one weakness in the position. Once this bishop leaves this e7 square, because you have to leave, otherwise you will lose it, well, all of my pieces, the knight, the bishop, and the rook are going to attack this very soft spot on f7 close to the king, and that's going to create some really, really big unpleasantries for the black king. So we have the move bishop to d8. He decided not to take and accept the sacrifice on e5, rook to b5, knight to a5, bishop to d5. And the position is starting to degenerate for black, because right now you're going to start losing your pawns. And now we come back to the same concept that we discussed when we first saw the presence of the opposite color bishops, and that is whenever you have opposite color bishops, you should be focusing on spotting and targeting your opponent's weaknesses, which are on the squares of your bishop's color, and that is in this case for white the light squares. This f7 pawn is a big problem. This pawn on b7 is another big problem. This bishop on d5 is simply dominating the knight on a5. Rook to c7 was on the board, and this, unfortunately for black, allows a very a cheapo, let's say, bishop takes f7. Well, you can take that bishop on f7, but that's only going to allow me to take on d8 with the rook, and that's going to be a favorable exchange. I'm also going to win a piece at the end. So for example, if you take, I'm going to take, you have to defend against that check. I'm going to exchange, and well, you're going to lose the knight as well. In the process, this is a completely winning position for white. So after bishop takes f7, black goes king to g7 in the game, but unfortunately after rook takes e7, bishop takes e7, bishop to d5, well, this is pretty much it. He decides to abandon the game and just resign, more or less, because I'm going to threaten to take on b7, but also if you try to defend with the move b6, well, guess what? My knight is also coming into play, and you have to defend against a very ugly threat, and that is knight to e6 check. That's going to be a triple attack. Well, you can shield some of your pieces, you can play a move such as rook to c8, but after knight to e6, well, you're in complete shambles, because you have to move the king on the h file. You cannot go on any of these light squares, because, well, that's just going to be a discovery attack, and I'm just going to pick a piece for nothing. So you have to go all the way to the h file. The problem is that right now I'm just going to maneuver my rook on the h file, force your king to g8, and that's going to open up the possibility for another discovery attack, which is going to be deadly. And that's it, guys. Jan Krzysztof Duda becomes the World Cup winner. Such a dominant performance in the finals, but also leading up to the finals, eliminating guys such as Magnus Carlsen. Well, I mean, you cannot have a better tournament than this young man just had. Once again, big congratulations, Jan Krzysztof, and we'll see you in the candidates. Guys, this is it. This concludes our coverage of the World Cup, and I'll be seeing you in the next video.